The complexity of modern software has outpaced the limits of traditional monitoring. Estimates indicate that engineers spend 50% of their incident time trying to find breadcrumbs versus fixing problems. The old model simply can't keep up in an autonomous environment. And this is why observability has become increasingly important. Logs, metrics, traces, they shouldn't be stovepipe pillars. Rather, they should be inputs to a real-time analysis system that helps teams understand why things behave the way they do. As AI-generated code and agents enter the tech stack, the ability to explain system behavior becomes the difference between predictability and utter chaos. Industry data suggests that around 70% of outages involve distributed dependencies that monitoring just can't keep up with or even surface. High-fidelity telemetry is going to cut mean time to resolution by 5 or even up to 10x, but most legacy tools are still trying to minimize data collection just to control costs. So teams that are using modern observability platforms tell us that 40% faster, they see 40% faster results for debugging and significantly reduced alert volume. So this is the environment where Honeycomb thrives. Unified traces, high cardinality data, OTel native workflows, and sub-second speed to insight are the capabilities that the company touts as its differentiation, especially important as complexity and AI converge. Welcome to our special AWS reInvent ecosystem program. Today, we're going to break down why observability is becoming a trust fabric for modern systems, what teams need to do to adopt it effectively, and how Honeycomb is positioning itself for the AI era. Let's get into it with Christine Yen, CEO of Honeycomb. Christine, welcome. Thanks for coming on theCUBE.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so you heard my upfront spiel. How come observability and trust are now so important and prominently back in the spotlight?
I loved your spiel. I think the simplest and first answer here is that with the advent of AI assistance and a lot of the code generation capabilities that have burst on the scene over the last couple of years, as teams adopt those technologies, they realize, to put it simply, that the more code they have, the more problems they tend to have. As much as we would like to believe that code that we write is bulletproof and right the first time, inevitably there are going to be interactions, user inputs, things that the engineers or AIs didn't predict. And as more code is being pushed to production, as more code is being pushed live and users have to interact with it, the need for that code to be reliable and predictable and basically do what the engineers expected, that problem just gets bigger and more important, not any less with AI's involvement.
So when you have increasingly AI writing code, taking agency, what does trust actually even mean today?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think every tool that claims to take some autonomy away from the human actors, that sounds very violent, but I think that there is a shift in who is making the decisions and where you draw that line. The determinant of where that line can be drawn is the level of trust in what decisions are you going to make, what code are you going to put out there, what edge conditions are you considering. And when the conversation even extends into topics like auto investigation, auto remediation, again, there's a question of trust around how much free rein am I going to give this agent? Do I trust that they have enough context on my system, on the parts or on the challenges that my software faces to be able to make the right decisions for my users?
So if I think about the dimensions of trust, well, first of all, I have to have visibility on the entire, end-to-end flow. I want to take accountability, but I'm not sure who's responsible. And I want to have a reliable and predictable system. So how are these dimensions evolving, with AI, when AI is, writing and even executing code?
Well, I think honestly, whether AI is writing the code or not, whether it's humans or not, there need to be feedback loops between what the code is doing in production and frankly, what you think it is. Being able to validate a hypothesis that I believe the code should be doing this and it is instead doing that is the basis, excuse me, the basis of any sort of investigation, any uh, any of the underpinnings to that reliable and predictable systems. When AI is executing code, or when when that balance of autonomy is shifted, and there's AI agents doing even more autonomous things than just generating code that is run, the importance of that paper trail being left so that humans can go in later and validate the decisions that an AI made, the factors that go into future decisions. Observability plays a part in all of this, in building up that trust via feedback loops that I think this change is going to have this impact. It did have this impact. Okay, I'm building up trust here that continuing on this loop will provide great results, or that if I change this parameter, we'll get a different set of results.
So the term observability seems to be standing the test of time. I mean, I remember, application performance management, APM was the sort of the buzzword. But so how should we think about observability? Should we think of it as a control plane for agentic software? Is that overstating it? How should we think about observability?
Whenever folks like to put very concrete and technical terms on something, like application performance monitoring, like logging, analytics, honestly, I feel like that runs the risk of getting caught up in implementation details rather than the goal someone is trying to achieve. And when I think about observability, I think it is simply the truth about what your software is doing. That's what people are trying to do when they're reaching for their tools. They're trying to figure out, why is my code, returning this value instead of that value? Why is this user having this experience instead of that experience? And ultimately, that's why I think observability of the term has stood the test of time, because all of the previous labels were reflections of a particular technology choice or implementation instead of being focused on the goal at hand.
So I like that, Christine. It's outcome based is essentially what you're saying. So people might think though, okay, well, AI is going to simplify things. It's going to reduce the need for observability tools per se. So can you explain why AI infused software
Yeah.
development increases the need for observability, not reducing it?
Yeah. Well, first, you shouldn't just take my word for it. There are a number of really great industry reports. The DORA report for 2025 recently came out, and they have data that backs up, increased adoption of AI coding assistants and increased, I believe it is, or decreased stability of their release process. So for them, it's more code and sort of decreased stability in the platform. I think that happens on one level. It is as simple as it is hard to write perfect code. It's hard to write perfect code for all use cases, and so inevitably, whether it's humans writing it or AIs writing it, there are going to be edge cases you didn't anticipate that will manifest as bugs. But even so, on a second level, even if there are not necessarily errors being pushed out, right? I'm sure there are engineering teams listening to this right now, going, "Well, I write good code, so bugs aren't as much of a problem." And let's just say that that's the case. Even in that case, AI assistants increase the velocity of code hitting production, code going live, and with that increased velocity, you run the risk, like it then means a bigger blast radius when something lands, even if it was intentional. And so I think that increased velocity or increased sort of instability in either case mean that you need to be more grounded in, okay, what just happened? Was it what I expected? If not, what do I do about it? How do I isolate it? And how do I remediate it?
So what are the known unknowns when we're talking about, AI generating big chunks of code and blind spots, if you will, and how should teams think about instrumenting for agentic?
Yeah, I think that some known unknowns. Um, this is a little bit mm, abstract, but I like the analogy quite a bit. Um, I wish I could attribute this directly. Unfortunately, I don't remember the source. Someone recently, I had heard recently someone say AI is like having an unlicensed 16-year-old behind a steering wheel, and observability is seatbelt and speed limits. You can still drive as fast as you want, but these are things that are meant to help keep you safe, to help you understand what, um, where where the reasonable boundaries may be. And I think that when you're building either with AI, where you're leveraging coding assistance, or you're building on top of AI, where you're leveraging LLM capabilities in your product, um, the 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 nature of the work is very similar. You're writing software, you're trying to achieve some user outcome. The form factor with which we're doing it is changing. And so you talked about agentic workflows. When I think about that, I think about long-running background jobs or sort of chat sessions. With that, you have a lot of deep work happening in sequence, where it's almost like every unit of work is just that much deeper than before because you're interacting with LLMs. You're interacting with sort of the apparatus of an AI system. And I think that a lot of the practices that we have built up in the cloud era can evolve healthily in AI. In cloud, I really think of the last 10 years as being the rise of tracing, a way to complement logs and metrics as discrete data types to capture these more complex interactions that happen in distributed systems. When I think about a chat session or long-running background jobs, I think of a series of traces that are linked together. Again, we are just sort of ratcheting up the complexity in our software systems and looking for tools and data types that can capture that complexity and reflect it back to us so that we can figure out why something is misbehaving when it doesn't do what we expect.
So your analogy, I think, is a good one, and it reminds me when I talk to like really hardcore AI researchers, there's always two sides. There's the optimist, and then there's some AI concern, and sometimes people put those in the camp of Luddites. But the folks that I'm referring to will point out that like things like autonomous driving, full self-driving, they're not learning systems, at least not yet. And there's a reason why we don't license, you know, humans until they're 16 years old, because there's a learning process. So my question relates to sort of the human in the loop. I know a lot of people are concerned about, job displacement, but my real question is, where do humans, fit? What do they do that these, systems necessarily can't do when it comes to whether it's debugging or architectural intuition or just human judgment? Where do humans fit?
I think that first, I think the answer there is going to evolve over time as we as an industry build up trust in these technologies that we are starting to play with, and as the technologies get better. Um, I actually really like the there's a post on the Honeycomb blog that actually really tries to dig into this question, not to drive your viewers to a different medium. But one of the studies that this blog post cited comes from the medical industry, where similarly, folks have been trying to automate or at least augment what doctors do for years. Diagnosis, um, and sort of the entire corpus of medical knowledge. And one of the things that they found was that when doctors leaned on automation first and then audited results, they actually found that their skills of diagnosis began to atrophy. Whereas when a doctor, had a hypothesis and then backed it up with all the automation and tooling at their disposal, they were able to just make better diagnoses without that atrophying effect. And I think and it's a little bit of a stretch to tie medical diagnosis to triage of systems, but there are parallels. And I think that there will always be an element of sort of context and judgment and intuition that a human brings because we as an industry still aren't perfect at making sure all the AIs have all the context. We're getting better at it. Every engineer is getting better at prompts. Every engineer is getting better at writing down assumptions and expectations before prompting whatever assistant to help write code. But there's always going to be dropped context, and I think humans are really good at holding all those pieces of knowledge in our brain and bringing them to bear.
And by the way, thank you for that. We're fine with driving people to your website. In fact, in prepping for this interview, I found some really good blogs. I think it was under blogs, it was under learning. And I think there was something in there that relates to my next question, which is the organizational one. Are teams thinking differently about how they should organize? In fact, I asked Mark Benioff of this. He wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal saying we're the last generation of managers that may be managing humans only. Well, what does that mean in your world? How should teams think differently about organizing around AI-assisted development workflows?
I think this is a good question, and one where we certainly have a hypothesis, but the world is changing so quickly that who knows where we'll be in another 5 years. I think that there is, with any sort of automation, an examination of the sort of work that is actually valuable and inherent in the role and something that a human can bring, and how much of the work can be automated, how much of the work can be made turned into a system and turned into a process and made repeatable. One could argue that in many of our roles, we are seeking, AI aside, for that sort of repetition, repeatability, and systematizing of our work. I do think that I continue to be a human optimist. I think that humans are going to continue bringing judgment and prioritization and curiosity that agents cannot. And so as we all learn to adopt, to bring agents into parts of our workflow and to identify the parts that can be extracted out, I don't know if I would agree with what Mark claimed about the overall composition of teams anytime soon.
I like to think of agents as really effective worker bees that work
Still need a lot of guidance
on my behalf. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Well, let's get into some of the news. You got hard news around reInvent. Take us through some of the latest announcements that you're excited about. What's new?
Yeah, the big news is that Honeycomb is now available in a private cloud offering. When Honeycomb started, we knew that this would be a path we could go down. And being sort of a really small team of engineers, we knew that we would rather solve the harder problem first, which is running a huge multi-tenant SaaS offering, and then figure out how to package it up for delivery in a private cloud version, that would ensure that what we delivered would be battle tested at scale, and where we would really have to understand how to solve, again, the hardest problem first. So that's really exciting. I think it opens up the power of the Honeycomb platform to a number of folks who have challenges adopting SaaS, either for governance, compliance reasons, or simply those at scale. The second sort of big announcement is we are extending our platform to really embrace the open telemetry standard for metrics data. Open telemetry, for anyone who isn't familiar, is an industry standard that has really come into its own over the last 4 or 5 years, where a number of observability vendors are coming together and agreeing on a standard format and specs and conventions around telemetry data. Metrics is one of the newer data types to be formalized as part of the open telemetry spec. And we are, I believe, one of the earlier first vendors to fully embrace and be fully compatible with all of the pieces of supporting metrics in that platform. So metrics are now first-class citizen in Honeycomb, and we're really excited for folks to see what all of their telemetry together can look and feel like. And the last piece, one of our announcements, is that our Honeycomb Canvas experience is now generally available. This is our sort of co-pilot. This is really, it's an incredible translation layer. If you think about observability being that truth about your software, when you're interacting with an observability tool, you're trying to get at that truth. And you have a question in your head like, why are errors increasing? Or why is latency concentrated in this part of the system? Or what is this user really experiencing? And the incredible part about Canvas is it leverages all of the technologies that we've become accustomed to in our sort of consumer lives and applies it to an observability tool where this class of tooling historically has felt very technical, maybe overwhelming to someone new to a team. With Canvas, it is easy and natural to just phrase a question in English or whatever language, honestly, and get back data answering your questions.
So, okay, cool. So Canvas just makes life a lot easier.
Makes
I
life
had
a lot easier.
on the open telemetry. I have some data with our partner ETR. They just did a recent survey on this, and I'd say roughly 80% of the sample said that they are either evaluating or using open telemetry. Small number saying extensively, a very large number, about 40% saying yeah, partially, and then another huge chunk saying no, not today, but we're evaluating it. So again, almost 80% saying we're in some way, shape, or form. And then I had a follow-up on the private cloud piece. We're seeing a lot of interest in doing private, whether it's sovereign AI or bringing AI to the data on-prem. What are the details there? How are you implementing that private cloud for Honeycomb?
Well, we actually have a couple different deployment options. One is sort of, I believe, self-hosted, Honeycomb managed. The other is Honeycomb hosted, Honeycomb managed, but in your cloud. So this is really just trying to get at folks who, again, want the SaaS experience, want the sort of polish that comes when the software is being delivered to hundreds of customers and enormous scale, but really being able to ensure that they have control of the data flow and having it run in their own environments.
Let me ask you a two-part question. Are there misconceptions that people should know about observability, and what should organizations and teams do to prepare for this AI onslaught and AI operated systems?
Boy, there are so many misconceptions. I'll try to pick one. Here's my top misconception. I think people tend to focus on specific types of telemetry. I can't count the number of times I have heard someone say, I have observability, I have logs and metrics and traces. And I think I understand how we got here. For many people, observability is just the sort of blind merger of logging, monitoring, and APM tools of the past. And I think that, again, if you reframe observability to be understanding the truth of what's happening in your systems, it allows you and your team to focus on the questions that you're really trying to ask and get answered. And by using this mindset of questions, I have found that it allows people to separate themselves from sort of the constraints that they believe certain telemetry types are held to. Oh, well, we can't ask this type of question, the system will break. We can't ask that type of question, it'll be too slow. A lot of the technologies have changed. A lot of the underpinning ways that we work with data have evolved over the last 10 or 20 years. And I think folks are selling themselves short when they focus on observability is what I'm used to. And instead, and can get a lot more value out of. Well, I want to understand this customer experience, or I want to debug this type of situation, and phrasing their needs around that. The question that you asked about what teams should do to prepare for AI built and operated systems, honestly, it is making sure they can close these feedback loops quickly and efficiently before introducing AI. Maybe they've already introduced AI and it's too late, that's fine. But really thinking about this as feedback loops, as ways to make sure your mental model matches the reality of production, using the truth about what's happening in production, it's that is a capability that your team feels confident in or does not feel confident in. It's not, do I have this type of telemetry or not?
Yeah, and when you see things, for two great points, I would add even, data is your friend. As I said up front, a lot of organizations trying to limit the amount of data. Data can actually, become a profit driver as opposed to a cost in this whole equation. And to your point about the misconception or the being prepared, I when you hear about like the MIT study, where 95% they say they aren't getting value, when you dig into those, it's because they haven't got their data act in order, and observability is obviously a key part of that. Last question, reInvent, thoughts, what are you excited about? Thinking about, past reInvents, what should we look forward to this year?
I mean, I am a huge reInvents fan. I love the excitement and the crowds and the feeling that the landscape changes so quickly. Right, the beautiful part about being in tech is that nothing stays quite the same, and you always have to be on your toes. And so I love being able to walk around and just see all the new capabilities and technologies that are available for us to play with. For Honeycomb in particular, really being able to bring these launches to the industry, being able to entertain conversations through Honeycomb Private Cloud that maybe had stalled in the past, to really show what observability can look like in this new era, is, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time with us. Definitely go to honeycomb.io, hit learn. There's a ton of stuff in there, case studies, blogs, some really cool, really useful information. So, Christine, thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. I loved being here.
And thank you for watching our reInvent ecosystem coverage and preview. You're watching theCUBE. I'm Dave Vellante. We'll see you next time.